we will have Grace Redhead, who comes to us from history.
In the summer of 1967, 21-year-old Neville Clare was admitted to hospital with another bout of the painful mystery disease he had suffered from since he was a child. A few hours later, he was approached by a nurse who demanded to know why he had not told her that he had sickle cell anemia. He had never heard of the disease before, but had been diagnosed 3 years earlier during a previous hospital stay. Though it was in his medical notes, no one had thought to inform him. Sickle cell was politically and racially sensitive because it is a hereditary blood disorder found amongst people whose ancestors lived in regions where malaria is or was common, such as sub-Saharan Africa, the Mediterranean, India, and the Middle East. It makes red blood cells into a sickle shape, impeding their passage through veins and causing painful and life-threatening complications. The post-war opening of British borders in 1946 to immigrants from the newly formed Commonwealth brought Britain's first significant numbers of sickle cell disease sufferers. It went from being an obscure tropical disease understood by a small group of haematologists to, during the mid-1980s, a high-profile national health issue and rallying point for anti-racist campaigners, infused with political, social and racial meanings in post-colonial Britain. This was political dynamite against the backdrop of changing immigration laws, Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, the Notting Hill riots, and the impact of American psychologist Eysenck and Jensen's work on Black IQ. It became a window onto the tension surrounding discussion of racial difference in a Britain struggling with its post-colonial identity. The medical research community produced much of the standard narratives on sickle cell, particularly the medical training videos of the period. Careful clinical language cloaked assumptions in the journal articles, but the imagery here is really revealing. This is one of the opening images from the 1964 film Sickle Cell Anemia in Nigeria. Incidence is shaded in orange, and it was accompanied by a narrator telling us that sickle cell is also found in Madagascar, parts of the Mediterranean, Arabia and India, though you'll notice that Africa is pretty central in this image. There are several interesting things here. Internal national divisions are not indicated. The whole of sub-Saharan Africa is highlighted in an undifferentiated sweep of orange, though sickle cell actually is localised into small areas in Nigeria, Ghana, the Ivory Coast and Mozambique. The imagery of the film is also striking. Throughout its 20-minute running time, the symptoms of the disease are demonstrated through the display of young, naked Nigerian children looking perplexedly into the camera as they are turned by attendant white doctors to demonstrate bossed skulls, enlarged spleens, and swollen hands and feet, often grimacing with pain. The link between Africa, African bodies, and sickle cell constructs the condition clearly as a black disease. Even in the 1977 British Medical Association training film, Sickle Cell, The Unkind Inheritance, which is filmed in the Sudan, it is stressed that the disease's expression is less severe in Arabians than in Africans, specifying Black Africa as the origin point of sickle cell, as if the disease's permutations become less severe the further one moves from Black Africa geographically and ethnically. This neglect of the non-black victims of sickle cell in much of the medical literature of the time had the effect of constructing the disease as another physical signifier of blackness and of linking it closely with Africa. This image is common to most textbooks, articles and pamphlets on the disease during the time, a world map shaded to indicate sickle cell distribution and with migration arrows. The early work on sickle cell in America in the early 20th century focused on using it as a tool to speculate about tribal movements. This image is accompanied by a narrator's commentary that sickle cell is also found in the New World, wherever men of African descent have migrated. Leaving aside this euphemism for enslavement and forced migration, there is a complex message here. The diaspora arrows imply not just physical passage, but the passage of time, locating Africa as the physical and historical point of origin. With the patients stripped of their context and presented in agony, both sickle cell and Africa are presented as homogeneous and constant, flattening black history into a single timeless narrative of primitive suffering. This anemia diaspora narrative presents black people in two steady states, diseased and in motion, consistent with what Paul Gilroy has described as the principal mechanism of modern British racism, the characterisation of blacks as either victim or problem, and here they are both. This image of Africa and Africans as the cradle and carriers of sickle cell persisted even into the late 1980s on both sides of the Atlantic, and one Professor Stuart Edelstein captioned a satellite image of Africa as the sickle-shaped continent. However, the construction of racial or ethnic identity is not a top-down classificatory process, but done by groups themselves. In 1975, the Organisation for Sickle Cell Anemia Relief, or OSCA, was founded, the first of its kind in Britain, and was shortly followed by the Sickle Cell Society. These were supported by prominent black figures such as Trevor Phillips, Alex Pascal, Lenny Henry, Diane Abbott, and Baroness Scotland. The logo of the Sickle Cell Society until 1990 featured a black family with a sickle shown beneath the faces of both parents and a double sickle beneath their daughter. This link between sickle cell and the black community fills into public understandings of sickle cell, and in 1990 the EastEnders cast was joined by a new character, Lloyd Tavernier, a black boy with a disease trying to escape his protective parents. Spokespeople for the cause frequently described it as one affecting solely Afro-Caribbeans and Africans. This essentialisation of sickle cell as a black disease by the academic community had been harnessed by black communities in Britain to draw attention to past imperial crimes and current institutional racism. They drew attention to what the medical videos left out, that the white anemia arrows are the paths of the slave trade rather than simply migration. They levelled the charge that widespread ignorance of the disease, both amongst doctors and its sufferers, reflected the indifference of the British state to its black subjects. This approach garnered a great deal of grants and publicity for the cause of sickle cell anemia. By the 1980s, it had become such an emblem of black needs that it received many government grants to counter accusations of institutional racism, particularly in the wake of the 1981 riots. Ultimately, however, sickle cell became only the target of short-term gestures of ethnic provision rather than permanent funding. Sadly, sickle cell's characterisation as a black disease also created anger and fear within the black community. At the first few meetings held by Oscar, Neville Clare, the boy that we spoke about earlier, recalled that they heard many angry accusations from the floor that they were the mouthpieces of the white medical establishment, attempting to discredit the black race. Many interested white doctors, concerned by the rising numbers of children born with the disease, were unwilling to take active measures to raise awareness. Given that it is an incurable genetic disease, prevention, and thus screening and education, are incredibly important, and this silence from the medical community undoubtedly caused much pain. Ultimately, the chief function of these charities was to serve as a mouthpiece for the medical establishment to the community, spreading awareness without angering people. Like skin colour, the disease has no social meaning, and yet it has been constructed as an emblematically black disease. The human genome has 30,000 genes, within which there are 6 genes that code skin colour, and a single allele that codes the sickle haemoglobin. So we are looking at a correspondence between one extremely small fraction and another even smaller fraction of the human genome, and that correspondence is imperfect. Despite the disease's power to demonstrate that race is a biological myth and that sickle cell and skin colour have no correspondence, in the context of post-colonial Britain it was actually used to substantiate notions of difference. I'd like to finish with this image, a photograph titled "In the House of My Father" by the artist Donald Rodney, who died of sickle cell anemia a year after making it in 1997, at age 37. He has made this small house from the skin taken from him during one of the many operations he underwent. His art examined questions of identity, family, home and Britishness, and used the imagery of his own sickness, such as X-rays, to refer metaphorically to social sicknesses, including racism and police brutality. Though Rodney may not have intended this meaning, it also seems an appropriate metaphor for the racial interpretations placed on the biological haemoglobin abnormality known as sickle cell anemia. It's flimsy, it's flawed, but it looks like home, and it's held together by a pin. Thank you.